Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are diving into how a massive, groundbreaking new genomics study is completely rewriting the history of the Vikings. Seriously, if you think you know the story of these legendary seafarers, you might want to prepare yourself. We're about to see that their DNA is telling a story that goes way beyond what's written in the history books.
First things first, I want you to take a second and just toss out all those pop culture assumptions you might have about homogeneous, blonde-haired, blue-eyed raiders. Today, we're cracking open the ultimate historical cold case. We're looking at the actual biological reality of the people who shaped Northern Europe and beyond. So, what actually happens when you dig up the past and sequence the DNA of 442 ancient Vikings?
The short answer? You completely rewrite history. The genetic evidence gives us this subversive plot twist that challenges pretty much everything we thought we knew about the Viking Age. We are officially stepping out of the realm of myths and sagas and right into the precise, undeniable reality of molecular science. Now, to really wrap our heads around this, we have to talk about the sheer scale of the science here. Researchers didn't just look at a handful of samples. They shotgun sequenced the DNA from 442 ancient human remains. We are talking about individuals spanning all the way from the Bronze Age, right through the Iron Age, the Viking Age, and all the way up to the early modern period. It is an absolutely unprecedented biological timeline.
You know, as we reflect on the 1000th anniversary of the Viking discovery of North America, and Leif Erikson's famous touchdown on the land he called Vinland, we can finally start to connect those epic, globe-spanning accomplishments to the grounded, molecular reality of what the genes actually tell us about the real people who made those voyages.
Section 1. Mapping the Viking World. Redrawing the genetic map of Scandinavia.
Okay, let's dive into this. When we map out the genetic spheres of influence across the Viking world, it reveals something totally fascinating. There was a distinct North Atlantic sphere sitting right alongside highly distinct Danish-like, Swedish-like, and Norwegian-like genetic clusters. So Scandinavia wasn't just one uniform block of people, it was highly structured by geography. And when these distinct groups expanded outward, they actually went in very specific directions. Swedish-like ancestry primarily moved eastward across the Baltic. Norwegian-like ancestry traveled west, settling in places like Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and the Isle of Man. Meanwhile, Danish-like ancestry migrated heavily down into England. It's like a giant puzzle, and the genetic boundaries of their diaspora align remarkably well with historical records.
But wait, here is a massive surprise. We always picture the Vikings exploding outward, right? Leaving Scandinavia to conquer the world. Well, the DNA proves that Scandinavia was absolutely not a closed loop. While they were out there raiding and trading, significant gene flow was simultaneously coming into the region. Southern European, British Isles, and Baltic ancestries were actively flowing into Viking Age Scandinavia. It turns out it was way more cosmopolitan than we ever realized.
Section 2. Raiders, relatives, and outsiders. The microstories hidden in ancient DNA.
So pivoting from that continent-spanning macro-level data down to the deeply human micro-level, it really begs the question, who exactly went on these early raids? Were they strangers banded together by a local king, or was it something much closer to home? To solve this mystery, researchers analyzed an expedition that predates the famous Lindisfarne raid by nearly half a century.
This takes us over to the Salme boat burial in modern-day Estonia. Honestly, it is a dramatically violent archaeological scene. 41 fallen warriors were found buried in 2 boats, surrounded by high-status weaponry. They clearly died violently on a foreign shore. But the big question is, who were they to one another?
And this brilliantly illustrates the power of ancient DNA. Scientists successfully sequenced 34 genomes from this single burial site. They found a genetically homogeneous group of high-status individuals. But here's the incredible part. They discovered 4 brothers, buried side by side along with a third-degree relative. This wasn't just some random military unit. This was an intense familial intimacy. It was a literal band of brothers embarking on these highly dangerous early raids together.
Wow, right? So, if family ties were that tight, it leads us to another core assumption we really need to challenge. Were all Vikings genetically Scandinavian? Was being a Viking strictly tied to a pure Scandinavian bloodline?
The answer is a resounding no. There is a completely fascinating contrast here. On one hand, you have the expected genetic Scandinavians spreading their DNA across Northern Europe. But on the other hand, in places like Orkney, Scotland, researchers found individuals buried in traditional high-status Scandinavian Viking fashion, complete with all the cultural markers. Yet their DNA reveals they were genetically Pictish. They were similar to modern Irish and Scottish populations with zero Scandinavian DNA. Basically, Viking was actually more of a job description or a shared culture than a strict ethnicity. People from entirely outside Scandinavia fully assimilated into the Viking way of life.
Now, we do also see the limits of this cultural mixing, specifically in the mysterious case of the Greenland Norse. These Viking settlers lived in Greenland for centuries before just vanishing. Their DNA shows they had a mixture with people from the British Isles, which makes sense, likely from their initial settlements in places like Iceland, but there is absolutely zero evidence of genetic mixing with the Paleo-Eskimo, Inuit, or Native American groups they shared the broader region with before their disappearance.
Section 3. The Genetic Legacy Today. How ancient DNA shapes modern human traits.
This is where it gets super relatable. This biological time capsule actually tracks human adaptation, specifically the gene allele that allows human adults to digest milk. Back in the Bronze Age, this genetic trait was actually quite rare in Scandinavia. But by the Iron Age, it starts rising, and it's during the Viking Age that this genetic ability finally hits the high frequencies we see in present-day Northern European populations. The Viking era was literally a crucial crucible for this evolutionary leap.
And when researchers compared ancient Viking DNA directly against present-day Danes to look at complex traits, they found some wild differences. For instance, alleles associated with schizophrenia and standing height showed differences, though some of that varied statistically. But the standout finding? The Vikings actually had a significantly higher frequency of genes for black hair color than previously thought, so that stereotype of the purely blonde Viking, it simply doesn't hold up to the genetic reality.
So, bringing it all together, the crucial point is this: what is the actual lasting footprint of the Viking diaspora on our modern map? Well, modern Scandinavians broadly resemble their Viking Age ancestors, but that Danish-like ancestry is now heavily distributed everywhere in the region. Abroad, the legacy is limited but surprisingly consistent. Up to 6% of DNA in England and 5% in Poland can still be traced back to them. And fascinatingly, because of those incoming trade and migration routes we talked about, 12 to 25% of North Atlantic ancestry still remains in present-day Norwegians today.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. The DNA has absolutely proven that the Viking world was fluid, dynamic, and genetically diverse. They assimilated outsiders like the Picts, and their raiding parties were built on intense family bonds. If being a Viking was ultimately more about a shared culture, an occupation, and a state of mind, rather than a pure shared bloodline, well, how does that change the way we view our own modern borders and identities today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning history.